The wind howled across the empty plains as Jack Morgan stood alone outside his ranch, staring at the line of riders slowly emerging from the dust of the western trail. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky blood red, and every instinct in Jack's body told him this night would change everything forever. 20 armed riders circled the ranch in silence, their horses stomping against the dry earth while the cold air carried the sound of metal and leather through the valley. Jack tightened his grip around the old revolver hanging at his side. He had seen dangerous men before, outlaws, bounty hunters, killers, but something about these riders felt different. They were not here to rob him. They were here for something hidden. Inside the ranch house, Emily sat near the fireplace holding a small wooden box against her chest while fear filled her eyes. "They found us," she whispered. Jack looked toward her and nodded slowly. 3 years earlier, Emily had arrived at his ranch during a violent thunderstorm, wounded and half frozen after escaping a brutal outlaw gang led by a man named Victor Crow, one of the deadliest criminals in the Wild West. Jack had hidden her, protected her, and over time the lonely rancher who trusted no one slowly fell in love with the mysterious woman carrying secrets in her heart. But Emily had never told him the full truth about the wooden box she guarded with her life. Outside, the riders stopped moving. Their leader stepped forward, a tall man dressed in black with a scar stretching across his face. Victor Crow himself. The outlaw smiled as he looked toward the ranch house. "Jack Morgan." His voice thundered across the valley. "You hand over the girl in the box, and maybe you live long enough to see sunrise." Jack said nothing. He simply walked onto the porch holding his rifle while the fading light cast long shadows across the ranch. "He rode a long way for disappointment," Jack replied coldly. The riders laughed, but Victor's smile disappeared. "You don't understand what you're protecting," he said. "That box belongs to me." Inside the ranch house, Emily's hands trembled. She finally opened the wooden box and stared at the folded papers hidden inside. Land documents, maps, evidence. Proof that Victor Crow and powerful businessmen from the East had been stealing land from innocent settlers and murdering entire families to expand their railroad empire across the frontier. Emily had once worked for Victor's gang before discovering the truth. When she tried to escape with the evidence, Victor hunted her across the West like an animal. Until Jack found her. Outside, the tension snapped like a rope ready to break. Victor raised his hand and the riders pulled their weapons. Jack's ranch suddenly became a battlefield. Gunfire exploded through the valley as bullets tore through wooden fences and shattered windows. Horses screamed while smoke filled the air. Jack fired from the porch with deadly precision, knocking riders from their saddles one after another. He moved like a man with nothing left to lose. Inside the house, Emily loaded rifles as fast as she could, fear battling courage inside her heart. She had already lost everyone she loved to Victor Crow. She refused to let Jack die because of her. Another bullet ripped through the wall beside her. The ranch was surrounded. Flames began spreading near the barn after one of the riders threw a lantern into the hay. Fire climbed into the darkening sky while chaos consumed the ranch. Jack ducked behind a water barrel as bullets slammed into the wood inches from his face. Sweat mixed with dust and blood across his skin. Then suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. One rider had slipped around the side of the ranch with a shotgun raised toward Jack's back. Before the outlaw could fire, Emily appeared in the doorway and pulled the trigger first. The blast echoed across the valley. The outlaw fell dead into the dirt. Jack looked at Emily in shock. She stood frozen, staring at the man she had just killed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jack grabbed her arm gently. "You did what you had to do." But Victor Crow was still out there, waiting in the smoke like a wolf circling wounded prey. As the fire spread across the ranch, Victor ordered his men forward for one final attack. The remaining riders stormed the property from every direction. Jack and Emily fought side by side while the old ranch collapsed around them. Wood cracked in the flames. Horses broke free from the stable and disappeared into the darkness. One by one, the riders fell until only Victor remained standing near the burning barn. The outlaw smiled as he stepped through the smoke, holding a revolver in each hand. "You should have stayed out of this, Jack," he growled. Jack slowly walked toward him, exhausted and wounded. "Maybe," he replied, "but some things are worth fighting for." The two men faced each other in silence while the fire roared around them. Then the guns moved. 2 shots exploded at the same time. For a moment, the world went still. Victor staggered backward, blood spreading across his chest before he collapsed into the dirt. Jack remained standing, barely. Emily ran toward him as the flames reflected in her tear-filled eyes. The nightmare was finally over. By sunrise, the ranch was nearly destroyed, reduced to ashes and smoke beneath the pale morning light. But Victor Crow was dead. His gang was gone. And the evidence inside the wooden box would expose the corruption spreading across the frontier. Weeks later, settlers from nearby towns arrived to help rebuild the ranch. Word of Jack Morgan's final stand spread across the Wild West like legend. Some called him a hero. Others called him a fool for risking everything for one woman. But Jack never cared about legends. On a quiet evening months later, he stood beside Emily outside the rebuilt ranch while the golden sunset stretched across the plains. The war was over. For the first time in years, peace had finally found them. Emily rested her head against Jack's shoulder as the wind moved softly through the grass. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Jack looked toward the endless frontier and smiled faintly. Not for a second. And somewhere beyond the distant mountains, the Wild West continued changing. But the story of the night Jack faced 20 riders alone would never be forgotten. Months after the night Jack Morgan defeated Victor Crow and rebuilt his burned ranch from the ashes, peace finally seemed possible on the western frontier. Travelers once again crossed the dusty roads near the valley, cattle moved safely through the plains, and families who had once lived in fear slowly returned to their homes. But peace in the Wild West never lasted forever. One cold evening, as the wind carried sand across the empty fields, a stranger rode toward Jack's ranch under the fading light of sunset. The man's horse was exhausted, and blood stained the sleeve of his coat. Jack immediately sensed danger. The stranger barely managed to climb down before collapsing into the dirt. Emily rushed forward while Jack kept one hand near his revolver. The man looked up weakly and whispered a name Jack hoped he would never hear again. "Crow." Jack's expression darkened. "Victor Crow is dead," he replied coldly. The stranger coughed painfully and shook his head. "Not Victor. His brother." Silence filled the ranch yard. Emily's face turned pale. Nobody had ever spoken about Victor's older brother because few people believed he even existed. His name was Samuel Crow, a ruthless former Confederate soldier who disappeared years earlier after entire towns mysteriously vanished along the southern frontier. Some called him a ghost. Others called him the Devil of the West. The injured stranger explained that Samuel Crow had returned after hearing about Victor's death, and now he was gathering killers, bounty hunters, and corrupt lawmen to hunt down every person involved in his brother's fall. Entire settlements were already burning. Witnesses were disappearing. Anyone connected to the wooden box of evidence was being murdered one by one. Before the stranger could say more, distant gunshots suddenly echoed through the valley. Jack turned instantly toward the hills. Riders. Dozens of them. Torches burned in the darkness like moving flames across the horizon. Emily's heart pounded as Jack grabbed his rifle. "Get inside," he ordered. But this time the enemy wasn't attacking only the ranch. The entire valley was under siege. Smoke soon rose from nearby homes as terrified families fled through the night. Samuel Crow's riders stormed across the frontier like an army. Jack knew he could not defend everyone alone, so for the first time in years he rode into town seeking help from men he once swore never to trust again. Old gunslingers, retired bounty hunters, former soldiers, men broken by war and regret. At first nobody wanted to fight Samuel Crow because his name alone terrified the frontier. But when they saw innocent families dying and children hiding from flames, something changed inside them. One by one they agreed to stand beside Jack Morgan. By midnight, nearly 20 armed riders gathered outside the town church beneath the cold moonlight. Some were old friends. Others were former enemies. Yet all of them knew this battle might be their last. Meanwhile,